Hello. Today we're going to have a bit of an experiment with dead reckoning, which is the process of figuring out what speed you're going, the direction you're travelling, what direction the wind is, what speed the wind is, and where you think you'll end up. So to do this, if I switch across to Google Spreadsheets, I've made a little spreadsheet up. So you can put in the direction of travel of the aircraft, the speed of the aircraft, the speed of the wind, the heading of the aircraft, the heading of the wind, and the amount of time you're going to be flying for. So I'll have to put that in afterwards to figure out what it's going to say, but basically all it does is it figures out from that the vectors of the direction you should have gone, the direction the wind's going, kind of the difference to, so that's where the aircraft would have ended up, that's the direction the wind's going. So if we, to make this more clear, say if we said the wind was 50 miles an hour at 340 degrees, that means from this point of origin the wind's going to try and get to there during the time, during 1 hour, sorry. The aircraft is going to try and get to there, but once you factor in the wind doing that to the aircraft's going to end up over there. Does that make sense? So by doing a little bit of maths on that, we can actually figure out what heading to do to counter the wind. So if we had flown 84 degrees, we would have ended up here. Yeah? So let's try that. If we put the heading of 84 instead of 66. Yep. So we actually fly for there, but we end up there. Does that make sense? So let's put 66 back in. The reason I put 66 in is I've made a little flight up. I'm going to take off from Booker and I'm going to fly towards Stansted. Now there is a 10 knot wind at 160 degrees, or from 160, which means the wind is travelling on a heading of 340 degrees. Does that make sense? You always say the direction of the wind is coming from, not where it's going to. So 160 degree wind means it's actually travelling at 340. So we're going to fly 66. The wind's 10 knots at 160 or 340 degrees as it's heading. And we're going to figure out if this works. So normally I would have flown 66 degrees, but according to my little spreadsheet I actually need to fly at 84 degrees to hold the same track. Yeah, and then given the speed, well, once we've got taken off and got our speed steady on the autopilot, we'll be able to have a play and do some calculations. So just taking off from Booker Airfield and rotate, gear up, flaps up. I'm in the Lancair Legacy, which is incredibly fast. Now, let's get this trimmed. You don't have to be particularly high. So just over 1,000 feet at the moment. Should we go for 1,500 on the autopilot? So let's circle back on ourselves to give ourselves some time. So 66 degrees or 84 degrees. If we go for 84 degrees, and let's pull the throttle back to 50%. So we're just coming past north. Just gone through 1,700 feet. Yeah, I'm going to drop back down to 1,500 to get this done. So that's the original course we wanted to go. But we're not going to do that. We're going to go to 84, which is going to be somewhere around there. So let's just trim the plane out, and let's can we centre that by doing that? No, we can't. Okay, let's put the autopilot on then, on heading mode. Heading, autopilot on, and altitude hold. 1,500 feet, that's great. So let's see what we're doing. We're doing 200 knots, just about. So let's plug that into here. We're doing 200 knots. Wind is doing 10. at 340 like we said. We're going 80, or sorry, our path we want to go is 66 degrees. And we won't worry about time for the moment. So it's saying to do 66 we need to do 68, obviously, yeah, because I inflated it, didn't I? So we need to change the heading back to 68 degrees we actually want to go. And if we go 68 degrees and we go and look at our map, we should see that we start to follow the 66 degree line by going at 68 degrees given, oh, the wind has changed, look. It's moving. So it's about 160, 162 is blustering, isn't it? We've probably got hills around us. Interesting. So the wind is moving, which is making this difficult. Okay, so we'll say the wind is going north. And it's only 6 knots at the moment. We'll say 8 knots. So we actually need to be travelling at 68 degrees still. It's still the same. And it's working, you can see. So we're trying to head over this way. So I'm trying to go, if I put a measure distance in, I'm trying to go that angle, but the wind is pushing me, because of the direction of the wind, that way slightly. Yeah? So this part of Dead Reckoning is figuring out how far we're, or you know, what angle we have to track through the sky to go to follow a track on the ground. So what heading we need to have in order for our bearing to be 66. So our heading is 68, our bearing is 66. Does that make sense? So the difference between heading and bearing. Heading is the direction you're pointing, bearing is the direction you're going. Or the direction to a reference point. And obviously our reference point is our destination in this case. So when you take a bearing from something, you're measuring the angle from you to something. So the angle from us to Stansted is 66 degrees, but our actual heading is 68 degrees. So that proves that doing a little bit of kind of resolving forces in a little spreadsheet, it's just using trigonometry to do it. I might do another video explaining how I did it on paper, what the sums were behind this. It's not very difficult. This also gives you how far you'll go, so if you're measuring time, if this was a long flight, I say actually we've been holding this speed and this distance against this consistent wind for an hour, where will we actually end up? See, because you can see from the direction of the wind, we're probably going to, where we thought this might be 42 nautical miles, given that we've got a slight element of tailwind as well, we might actually end up this far instead of that far. Does that make sense? Or even further, depending on how much of that wind is behind you. So by doing a little calculation like that, you can figure it out. But I think that's kind of proven it, hasn't it? That even though the wind is varying a little bit, which is pushing us, you can see the line is moving around inside the track. It's more or less working. All by doing a little bit of calculations in a spreadsheet. So if we said over the course of 1 hour here, you can see the distance we would travel in that hour is 603.39 nautical miles. Anyway, I think that's kind of covered it, to be honest. Obviously, if you were doing this on a long flight, then you could do the distance calculations as well, and you could dead reckon exactly where you're going to end up. Not just the direction you're going, but where along that direction you're going to end up after a given amount of time. And all this, yeah, it's just some simple school mathematics, you can see now, because the wind has dropped to 6 knots, we are slowly going off track. So if we were down to 6 knots on the wind, we need to be doing 67.5 degrees. You can see it's slowly moving off to the side of the track. So let's move this to 67 degrees. That's just going to make it worse, isn't it? But it's there or thereabouts. Enough that, you know, you could get within a mile or two at the end. And to be honest, all you're really playing with this game is not to do it completely without radio. It's when you're in between VOR stations and you're, you know, nowhere near them, then you can use this method to get back within the range of a VOR station. So if you imagine circles, if you draw some range circles on these VOR stations, I've probably got massive range circles, yeah, 50 miles. So anywhere within there is probably going to pick up the VOR station. But if you imagine we're out in the middle of nowhere and there's no VOR stations nearby, then suddenly Dead Reckoning comes into play. It's worth pointing out actually while we're looking at this, if you go into options in Little Nav Map, you can change the size of the... I'm not going to be able to find it, am I? You can change the size of the range rings. Here we go. So it's in the map settings. So we want 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150. That's probably all we need. Okay, apply. Okay. So if we were to put some range rings on there now, it'll make a bit more sense. Yeah, we got 25, 50, 75. Because I imagine we can still pick up 113.75 even from all the way over here. Let's try it out. So if we go and look on our nav radio, 113.75. That was correct, wasn't it? 113.75. Make it active. Yeah, and it's switched on. So we want to know what direction it is to that beacon. About, does that tell us on the course knob? 257 degrees. So let's find that out. Measure distance to here, 255 degrees. So it's within the ballpark. We must be getting close to Stansted. So should we tune to 110.5? So 110.5. Make it active. Change this one as well. We also know the runway direction is 43 degrees, so we can change the course selector to 43 degrees. So does that make sense? So this is what the type of gauge this is. It actually rotates, the whole thing rotates, because it's like a combined compass. This one's, we can put this on the same as well actually. 43 degrees, so we go that way. So this is going to give horizontal and vertical. This is just going to give you your course, because it's kind of a combined nav radio and compass. So we want to turn right to come into the to intercept the beam. So let's take this out to 100 degrees, or I say 120 maybe. Get rid of some speed. So you can see on this path here, there's the runway direction, and we're almost perpendicular to it, but we know, looking at Little Nav Map, that we're actually just intercepting the ILS beam. So gear down, The distance measuring equipment is up and running as well, so you can see the distance ticking down to the runway. So I'm going to come off autopilot now. I'm going to fly it myself. So we're doing 100 knots. Flaps down. Just first position for the flaps. Just keeping an eye on the aeroplane. Slowly turning. So we should see the ILS beam start to come across anytime soon. And actually you can see on the GPS over here where we are in relation to it. So get ready for the ILS beam to start moving. There it comes. So we'll start our turn. So we're breaking rules here really, because we're going to fly with a tailwind. We're going to land with a tailwind. But this is just, you know, a very quick example to show the navigation really, not correct procedures and the dangers of landing with tailwinds. It's only about 6 knot wind anyway, so it's not going to be a major problem. So let's set us up in the chair a little bit. Turn slightly, and you can see over here on this nav2 you can see that we're slightly above the beam as well. If you look in the mist now you can see the runway coming out of the mist, so we're pretty much on track. Flaps second position, trim the aeroplane a little bit more. So we're a little bit high. Do some speed. Full flaps. A bit low, just pulling back onto the ILS. Again, this is a massive runway. You would never normally be landing a general aviation aeroplane on a big runway like this, so this is a bit of a silly example. But the real purpose of this was to show dead reckoning. As I said, I'll do another video at some point showing the maths on paper, because you could do it on paper. I just wrote a spreadsheet because it's dead easy to plug it into. And we're down. Flaps up. And I guess in the real world you'd be talking to the control tower at this point as well. Okay, so I think we kind of proved the point. I'll come off the runway here. Oh well, on the grass. To go and see the control tower now and get told off. Not that there's much air traffic around at the moment anyway with the coronavirus. So yeah, I'm going to turn the video off there.